The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound 17-year-old Wallace Dunmore had ever heard. It echoed louder than the Boeing 747 engine spooling up outside the terminal window, louder than the frantic announcements over the PA system at JFK's Terminal 4. One moment he was a kid on the cusp of his future, a first-class ticket to Boston in his hand, and a scholarship to MIT's prestigious aerospace engineering program waiting for him. The next he was a spectacle, a threat, his crime. The unforgivable sin of existing in a space where someone else decided he didn't belong. They saw his hoodie, not the mind beneath it. They saw his skin color, not the ticket that cost more than their weekly salary. And they had no idea they had just handcuffed the truth, and that the truth was about to make a phone call that would bring their world crashing down. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 hummed with a unique kind of organized chaos. It was a symphony of rolling suitcases, multilingual announcements, and the distant, promising roar of jet engines. For 17-year-old Wallace Dunmore, it was the sound of the future. He clutched his boarding pass for Aerolink Flight 1138 to Boston, the crisp paper a tangible symbol of the next step in his life. He wasn't just going to Boston. He was heading to a 6-week intensive summer program at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a coveted spot he'd earned through years of relentless dedication. Wallace was a study in quiet confidence. He wore a simple grey MIT hoodie, a gift from his dad, comfortable joggers, and a pair of worn-in sneakers. On his back was a sleek, high-tech backpack containing his life, a powerful laptop for coding flight simulations, a tablet filled with his own preliminary airfoil designs, and a dog-eared copy of Ignition by John D. Clarke. He wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. His passion was for the elegant physics of flight, the complex dance of thrust, lift, drag, and weight. Airports to him were cathedrals of modern engineering. He found his gate Bitra too, and settled into a seat near the window, watching the ground crew scurry around the massive Aerolink jet he was about to board. He loved this airline. His father had instilled in him a deep appreciation for its history, its fleet, and its commitment to innovation. He pulled out his tablet and stylus, losing himself in the intricate schematics of a variable geometry wing design he was toying with. The world around him faded into a muted hum, the way it always did when he was deep in his work. The boarding announcement for first-class passengers snapped him out of his trance. He packed his tablet away, stood up, and joined the short line. When his turn came, he handed his passport and boarding pass to the gate agent. Her name tag read, Karen Bishop. She was a woman in her late 40s, with a taut expression etched onto her face, as if she'd been sucking on a lemon for a decade. She glanced at the first-class ticket, then at Wallace, then back at the ticket. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. It was a micro-expression of disbelief, of suspicion, that Wallace had seen 1,000 times before. It was the look he got in high-end stores, the look he got in certain neighborhoods, the look that said, "You don't belong here." "Is there a problem?" Wallace asked politely, keeping his voice even. "I just need to verify this," Karen said, her tone clipped. She tapped furiously at her keyboard, her nails making sharp, accusatory clicks. The line behind Wallace was growing, and he could feel the impatient stares on his back. "Everything should be in order," Wallace said, a hint of weariness creeping into his voice. "The ticket was booked weeks ago." "The system is slow." She lied, her eyes flitting from the screen to his face. "This is a rather expensive ticket for someone your age." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "Someone who looks like you. Someone dressed like you." "It's a gift," Wallace replied, the words tasting like ash. He shouldn't have to explain himself. "A gift," Karen repeated the word, dripping with skepticism. She scanned his boarding pass again, then again. "I'm seeing a flag on this reservation. I'm going to need you to step aside, sir. We need to conduct an additional security screening." Wallace's heart sank. He knew there was no flag. This was a fabrication, a pretense born from a prejudice she couldn't even admit to herself. "An additional screening. I already went through TSA. My bag was scanned. I walked through the detector. What is the issue?" "Standard procedure." She snapped her voice, rising in volume, attracting more attention. "Now please step over there and don't make a scene." Humiliation washed over him, hot and prickly. People were openly staring now, whispering. He saw the judgment in their eyes, the assumption that he must have done something wrong. A young black man in a hoodie being pulled out of the first-class line, their minds filled in the blanks with a story he was tired of being a character in. He moved to the designated area beside the desk, his posture straight, refusing to shrink under their gaze. He had done nothing wrong. His father had always taught him, meet ignorance with dignity, but never ever surrender your self-worth. Karen picked up the phone behind her desk, her back to him, but he could hear her hushed, urgent tone. He caught snippets. Suspicious individual. First-class ticket. Questionable origin. Evasive. Each word was a dagger. Evasive. He had been direct and polite. Suspicious. His only crime was being a teenager passionate about aeronautics. He watched as two Port Authority police officers began walking briskly toward the gate. One was a younger man who looked vaguely apologetic. The other older officer had a hard and cynical look on his face. His name tag read, F. Miller. The moment Officer Miller arrived, the situation deteriorated. He didn't ask questions. He issued commands. "Sir, I need you to put your bag on the floor and your hands where I can see them." "Officer, what is this about?" Wallace asked, his voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I'm just trying to board my flight to Boston." "This is about you listening to my instructions," Miller retorted, his hand resting on the butt of his sidearm. "The gate agent reported suspicious activity. We're going to get to the bottom of it." Karen Bishop, now emboldened by the presence of law enforcement, chimed in. He couldn't explain how he got the ticket. He was being very cagey. "I said it was a gift." Wallace protested, his frustration finally boiling over. "I have my ID, my passport, my school admission letter in my bag. Just let me show you." "Empty your pockets." "Slowly," Miller commanded, ignoring Wallace's plea. Wallace complied, placing his phone and wallet on the counter. His hands were trembling slightly now, not from fear, but from a profound, soul-crushing anger. The crowd of passengers was a silent jury, their phones held up not to help, but to record the spectacle. He was no longer Wallace Dunmore, MIT-bound prodigy. He was content, a viral video in the making. "What's this?" Miller asked, picking up Wallace's wallet and flipping through it. He saw the cash, a few $100s his dad had given him for expenses. "Carrying a lot of cash, aren't we?" "It's for my trip," Wallace said, through gritted teeth. The officer's eyes landed on the black credit card in the wallet. An Aerolink Executive Elite card forged from carbon fiber and reserved for the airline's most valued clients. Miller's expression soured further. He likely assumed it was stolen. He showed it to Karen, who scoffed. "There's no way," she muttered, just loud enough for Wallace to hear. That was it. That was the final shred of his patience. "Look," Wallace said, his voice rising. "My name is Wallace Dunmore. The ticket is legitimate. The card is legitimate. This is harassment, and you have no grounds for any of this." Officer Miller saw his agitation as aggression. "That's enough. You're causing a disturbance. Turn around. Put your hands behind your back." Wallace's world tilted. "You can't be serious. For what? For trying to get on a plane?" For failing to comply and creating a public disturbance, Miller said, his voice cold and final. The younger officer hesitated, a flicker of doubt in his eyes, but Miller shot him a look that quelled any dissent. The cold metal bit into Wallace's wrists. The first click was a shock. The second click securing the cuff was a sentence. He was standing in the middle of an airport terminal in front of the gate for his father's airline in handcuffs. The whispers from the crowd turned into a loud murmur. He saw a woman shaking her head in pity, a man smirking, and another dozen phones capturing his lowest moment for their social media feeds. Karen Bishop watched, a smug look of vindication on her face. She had seen a threat, and now it was being neutralized. Her instincts, she believed, had been right. She had kept the other passengers safe. Wallace stared past her through the large window at the plane that was supposed to carry him toward his dreams, its gleaming fuselage emblazoned with the familiar golden A of Aerolink seemed to mock him. He felt a tear of pure rage and frustration slide down his cheek. He quickly turned his head to hide it. He would not give them the satisfaction. He had one phone call, and he knew exactly who he was going to call. The small, sterile security office felt a universe away from the bustling gate. The air was stale, smelling of old coffee and disinfectant. Wallace sat on a hard plastic chair, the handcuffs now fastened to a metal loop on the wall, a modern-day shackle. Officer Miller stood with his arms crossed, radiating an aura of self-importance, while the younger officer, whose name Wallace learned was Peterson, shifted his weight uncomfortably by the door. Karen Bishop had followed them ostensibly to give her official statement, but really it seemed to savor her victory. "So you want to tell us your real name?" Miller began, pulling up a chair and sitting backward in it like a detective in a bad movie. "I've already told you my name. It's Wallace Dunmore." Wallace said, his voice a low, controlled monotone. He was channeling his father's demeanor. In a crisis, stay calm, state facts, let the other person's agitation be their own undoing. "And the credit card," Miller sneered. "Let me guess your daddy gave it to you." "Yes, he did," Wallace replied, meeting the officer's gaze without flinching. Karen chimed in, her voice dripping with false concern. "We ran the card number. It's linked to a corporate account with the highest level of clearance, an account belonging to a D. Dunmore. You see, the pieces don't fit. A kid in a sweatshirt carrying a top-tier executive card. It's our job to be careful. D. Dunmore is my father. Desmond Dunmore," Wallace stated simply. Miller let out a short, humorless laugh. "Desmond Dunmore. Sure, kid. And I'm Bruce Wayne. You think we were born yesterday? You probably skimmed the card number or found it. We're not stupid." The condescension was infuriating, but Wallace held his ground. The storm of emotion inside him, the humiliation, the anger, the fear was being compressed into a single cold point of clarity. They had built a narrative around him, and no fact would penetrate it, because the narrative was easier for them to believe. It confirmed their worldview. "I have the right to a phone call," Wallace said, his voice flat and devoid of the emotion he was feeling. Miller shrugged. "Fine. Who you calling your public defender?" He gestured to Officer Peterson. "Let him make his call." Peterson brought the office landline over its cord stretched taut. He dialed the number Wallace recited from memory. As it rang, Wallace could feel the three of them watching him, waiting for him to call a frantic mother or a flustered friend who would confirm their suspicions. The phone picked up on the second ring. "This is Desmond." The voice was deep calm and radiated an authority that seemed to subtly change the air pressure in the room, even through the cheap speaker of the phone. "Dad, it's me, Wallace." There was a fractional pause. Desmond Dunmore could detect the slightest tremor in his son's voice, the unspoken stress. "Wallace, are you okay? Did you board yet?" "No," "There's been a problem at the gate at JFK," Wallace said, choosing his words carefully. "I'm in a security office. They've detained me." "Detained you for what?" The calm in his father's voice didn't vanish, but it was now underpinned by a razor-sharp edge. "They didn't believe my ticket was mine. They said I was suspicious. Dad, they put me in handcuffs." The last words came out as a choked whisper. Admitting it out loud to his father made the humiliation feel fresh and raw all over again. Silence. It was a heavy, profound silence. Officer Miller and Karen Bishop exchanged a look, a mixture of amusement and annoyance. They thought he was putting on a show. Then Desmond Dunmore spoke again. His voice was different now. It was colder. It was the voice he used in boardrooms when a multi-billion-dollar deal was on the verge of collapse, the voice that made executives tremble. "Wallace, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Are the people who detained you in the room with you right now?" "Yes," Wallace said. "Put your phone on speaker." Wallace nodded at Officer Peterson, who pressed the button. The small office was suddenly filled with the immense presence of Desmond Dunmore's voice. "To whomever is in that room," Desmond began, his tone lethally precise. "My name is Desmond Dunmore. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Aerolink Global Holdings. The boy you have in handcuffs is my 17-year-old son, Wallace. He was on his way to an MIT program flying on an airline that as of this moment I am still in charge of." The shift in the room was instantaneous and seismic. Karen Bishop's smug expression dissolved, replaced by a ghastly, pale shock. Her jaw went slack. Officer Miller's casual backward chair posture vanished. He shot upright, his face a mask of disbelief. Officer Peterson looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "I want the name and badge number of the arresting officer," Desmond's voice commanded from the speaker. Miller was frozen, his mind scrambling to process the new reality. Wallace, looking directly at him, answered for him. "His name is Officer F. Miller. I don't know his badge number." "It will be on his uniform," Desmond said. "I also want the name of the gate agent who initiated this complaint." Wallace glanced at Karen, who looked physically ill. "Her name is Karen Bishop." "Thank you, son," Desmond said, his voice softening for a moment before hardening again. "Now, Officer Miller and Miss Bishop, you have 60 seconds to take my son out of those handcuffs, apologize to him, and escort him to the Concord Lounge. Your airport director, a man named Jonathan Weathers, is being called as we speak. My personal jet is being fueled at Teterboro. I will be at JFK in under an hour, and when I arrive, I expect to have a full and complete explanation for why my son was treated like a criminal for the simple act of trying to board one of my planes. Am I understood?" There was no room for argument. The voice on the phone was not just a father. It was a tectonic plate of power shifting beneath their feet. Miller fumbled for the handcuff key, his hand suddenly clumsy and slick with sweat. "Yes, sir." He stammered the words, catching in his throat. Karen Bishop just stood there, speechless, her face ashen. The narrative she had so confidently constructed had just been obliterated, and she was standing in the wreckage. "Wallace." Desmond's voice came through again, softer now for his son alone. "I'm on my way, just hold on." "Okay, Dad," Wallace whispered. The line went dead. Officer Miller rushed forward and unlocked the handcuffs. The release was as loud as the initial click had been, but this time it sounded like freedom. The red marks on Wallace's wrists throbbed. He rubbed them slowly, the feeling returning to his hands, his gaze fixed on the two people whose worlds had just imploded. They didn't look at him. They couldn't. Their eyes darted around the room, at the floor, at the ceiling, anywhere but at the face of the boy they had so grievously misjudged. The cascade had begun. The walk from the security office to the Concord Lounge was the most excruciatingly awkward journey of Wallace's life. Officer Miller and Karen Bishop flanked him a disgraced honor guard. Their earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a thick, cloying subservience. Miller, who had barked commands at him minutes earlier, now asked in a near whisper if he could perhaps get him something to drink. Karen, who had looked at him with such disdain, now couldn't meet his eyes, her gaze fixed on the polished floor tiles, as if they held the secrets to her salvation. The news had already begun to ripple through the terminal staff. As they walked, Wallace noticed whispers and pointed fingers from other Aerolink employees. A supervisor met them at the lounge entrance, a man named Robert Chen, the airport's station manager. His face was a pained rictus of professional panic. He had clearly already spoken with someone from corporate headquarters, or worse, with Jonathan Weathers, the airport director. "Mr. Dunmore," Chen said, his voice strained. "On behalf of Aerolink, I am so deeply sorry for this misunderstanding. Please come in. Anything you need, it's yours." Wallace simply nodded, too emotionally exhausted to speak. The heavy glass doors of the Concord lounge swished open, revealing a sanctuary of hushed luxury. It was a world of plush leather armchairs, muted lighting, and the discreet clinking of ice in crystal glasses. It was a space designed to insulate its occupants from the chaos of the airport he had just been so publicly humiliated in. Now it felt like a gilded cage, a place to hide him, and the airline's colossal mistake from public view. Chen led him to a private suite at the back of the lounge, a room with its own bathroom and a commanding view of the tarmac. "Please make yourself comfortable. Can I get you anything, food, drink? A new flight to Boston has been arranged for you on a private jet, of course, whenever you're ready. No need to take the commercial flight." "I'm fine," Wallace said, his voice raspy. "I just need a minute." Of course," Chen said, wringing his hands. He then turned to Miller and Bishop, his professional veneer cracking to reveal a simmering fury. "You two. My office. Now." The two of them scurried away like chastened children. Left alone, Wallace sank into an armchair that felt like a cloud. The adrenaline that had sustained him began to ebb away, leaving a bone-deep weariness in its place. He stared out the window at the ballet of airplanes taking off and landing. An hour ago he had looked at them with wonder and excitement. Now all he felt was a hollow ache. He pulled out his phone. It had been returned to him, with his wallet placed gently on the table as if it were a holy relic. It was already blowing up. A friend from his robotics club had texted, "Dude, is this you attached?" was a link to a Twitter video. His hands shaking, Wallace clicked on it. The video was shaky filmed from across the gate area, but the image was brutally clear. It was him. He watched himself being questioned, saw his own frustration building. He watched Officer Miller grab his arm. He watched the handcuffs being snapped onto his wrists. The audio was muffled, but the jeers and whispers from the crowd were audible. The video was only 40 seconds long, but it had already been viewed over 50,000 times. The caption read, "Aerolink and Port Authority racially profiling a kid at JFK. He was just trying to board his flight. The airplane, while black, nodsel JFK." A wave of nausea hit him. It was real. It was out there. His humiliation wasn't just a memory. It was a piece of digital media to be shared, commented on, and dissected by strangers. He scrolled through the comments. Disgusting. Hope he sues. Typical. They see a black kid in first class and assume he's a criminal. There's got to be more to the story. He was probably mouthing off. I was there. The kid was polite. The gate agent was on a power trip. He felt detached, as if he were reading about someone else. But it was him. He was the subject of their debate, their pity, their scorn. He threw the phone onto the seat next to him, unable to look at it anymore. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes, the image of the handcuffs seared into his mind. He thought about his father. Desmond Dunmore was a man who had built an empire from nothing. He was the son of a baggage handler and a school teacher from Queens. He'd worked his way through college, got his pilot's license, earned an MBA, and climbed the corporate ladder with a ferocious intelligence and an unyielding will. He had faced his own battles with prejudice, boardrooms full of older white men who underestimated him, who saw him as a token. He had taught Wallace that the best revenge was not anger, but excellence. To be so good they couldn't ignore you. To build something so powerful they couldn't deny you. And Desmond had built Aerolink into a global behemoth. It was his life's work, his legacy, and its employees had just treated his son, the heir to that legacy, like a piece of trash. A soft knock came at the door. It was Robert Chen again, his face even paler than before. "Mr. Dunmore, your father has just landed at Teterboro. His helicopter is en route to the JFK helipad. He will be here in 15 minutes. 15 minutes. The words hung in the air. It wasn't just a father coming to comfort his son. It was the king coming to survey the damage done to his kingdom and to his prince. And Wallace knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the storm was only just beginning. The apologies and the private lounges were just the calm before the hurricane. When Desmond Dunmore arrived, there would be a reckoning. The 15 minutes before his father's arrival felt like an eternity. Wallace paced the small suite, the plush carpet doing nothing to soothe his frayed nerves. He tried to busy himself washing his face in the marble-clad bathroom, splashing cold water on his skin to chase away the lingering feeling of violation. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, the same face, the same eyes. But something had shifted. A layer of youthful innocence had been stripped away, replaced by a harder, more wary understanding of the world. He heard the faint but unmistakable whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of a helicopter descending. It grew louder, a percussive heartbeat, signaling the imminent arrival of a force of nature. A few minutes later, the door to the suite opened again. Robert Chen stood there looking utterly terrified, and behind him stood Desmond Dunmore. Desmond was not a physically imposing man, but he filled a room with an energy that was immense. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt and no tie. His hair was cut short, with distinguished flecks of grey at the temples. His face was calm, his expression unreadable, but his eyes the same intelligent, perceptive eyes as his son's. Missed nothing. They scanned the room, took in the opulent surroundings, and finally rested on Wallace. In that moment, he wasn't the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. He was just a father. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled Wallace into a hug. He held him tightly, one hand on the back of his son's head. "Are you okay?" Desmond asked, his voice, low and rumbling, meant only for Wallace. Wallace couldn't speak. He just nodded, burying his face in his father's shoulder, the scent of expensive cologne and the solid feel of his presence, a grounding force in the swirling chaos of his emotions. For the first time since the ordeal began, he felt safe. Desmond held him for a long moment, then pulled back his hands on Wallace's shoulders. He looked into his son's eyes, searching. Then he glanced down at Wallace's wrists, where the faint red marks were still visible. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. It was the only outward sign of the cold fury brewing within him. He turned to Robert Chen, who was still hovering by the door. "Leave us," he said. It wasn't a request. Chen vanished, closing the door softly behind him. "Tell me everything," Desmond said, guiding Wallace back to the armchair. "From the very beginning. Don't leave out a single detail." Wallace recounted the entire story, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. He described Karen Bishop's initial suspicion, her condescending tone, the lie about the flag on his reservation. He described Officer Miller's immediate aggression, the public search, the confiscation of his wallet, and the ultimate humiliation of the handcuffs. He told his father about the crowd, the phones, and the video he had seen online. Desmond listened without interruption. His face remained a mask of calm control, but his eyes were like burning coals. He was a master of emotional discipline, a man who believed that anger was a tool to be used, not a state to be indulged. Right now, he was forging his anger into a weapon of surgical precision. When Wallace finished, Desmond nodded slowly. "You did well," he said. "You were polite, you stated the facts, and you didn't lose your temper. You did everything I ever taught you. The failure was not yours. It was ours. Mine. Yours?" Wallace asked, confused. "Dad, this wasn't your fault. I am the CEO of this airline," Desmond replied, his voice steely. "Every single employee, from the baggage handlers to the pilots to the gate agents, operates under a culture that I am responsible for. If that culture allows a woman like Karen Bishop and a man like Officer Miller to see my son, to see any young black man as an inherent threat, then that culture is broken. And I am responsible for fixing it, or tearing it down and building a new one." He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the Aerolink planes parked at their gates. They were symbols of his success, of his life's work. Today they were symbols of a deep institutional sickness. "This isn't just about you, Wallace," he continued, his back still to his son. "This isn't about one ignorant gate agent or one power-tripping cop. This is about the name on that plane. My name. Your name. It's about the promise we make to every single passenger who buys a ticket. A promise of safety, respect, and dignity. Today we broke that promise in the most spectacular way possible." He turned back around, and the mask of calm had been replaced by a look of grim determination. "And the consequences for that will be equally spectacular." He pressed a button on an intercom on the wall. "Chen, get in here. Bring Bishop and Miller with you, and find out where Airport Director Weathers is. Tell him if he isn't in this room in 10 minutes, I'll be having my press conference on the steps of the Port Authority headquarters instead of in this lounge." A terrified, crackling voice responded, "Yes, Mr. Dunmore. Right away." The king was in his court, and judgment was about to be rendered. Wallace sat back, a silent observer. He was about to witness firsthand what happened when the irresistible force of his father's will met the deeply entrenched object of institutional prejudice. The atmosphere in the suite crackled with tension. It was a small room, and it felt even smaller with the 5 people now crowded into it. Desmond Dunmore had taken a position standing by the window, not behind a desk, but using the open space to dominate the room. Wallace sat in the armchair, a silent prince to his father's avenging king. Robert Chen, the station manager, stood near the door, sweating through his uniform. Karen Bishop and Officer Miller stood in the center of the room side by side, a tableau of misery. Karen's face was blotchy and tear-streaked, her professional composure completely shattered. Miller was attempting a stoic expression, but the slight tremor in his hands and the way he avoided Desmond's gaze betrayed his fear. Desmond let the silence stretch for a full minute, a tactic he used to dismantle opponents in negotiations. He let them stew in their anxiety, forcing them to confront the gravity of their actions without him saying a word. Finally, he spoke, his voice dangerously soft. "Miss Bishop." Karen flinched as if he had shouted. "Yes, sir, Mr. Dunmore, sir. I am so sorry. It was a terrible mistake. I am not interested in your apology." Desmond cut her off his words like chips of ice. An apology is for a mistake. Spilling coffee on a passenger is a mistake. What you did was not a mistake. It was a choice, a series of choices. I want you to walk me through them." He began to pace slowly, his movements deliberate and predatory. "You saw my son, a 17-year-old boy, in the first-class line. What was your first thought?" I was just surprised," she stammered. "He looked so young, and the ticket was what, expensive?" Desmond finished for her. "We sell expensive tickets every day, Miss Bishop. Was it his age that was the problem, or his age combined with the color of his skin?" No, it wasn't that," she insisted, her voice rising with panic. "I have to be vigilant, for security. I saw a flag on the reservation." "That's interesting," Desmond said, stopping his pacing to face her directly. "Because I had our head of global ticketing pull the entire PNR, the passenger name record, for this booking. There was no flag. There have never been any flags on this account. It is one of our oldest and most respected corporate accounts. So let me ask you again, Ms. Bishop. Why did you lie?" Karen's face crumpled. She had been caught in a direct, verifiable falsehood. I thought. I just had a feeling. The system can be glitchy and... A feeling. Desmond repeated the words, laced with contempt. "You had a feeling. So on the basis of your feeling, you decided to publicly detain and humiliate a paying passenger. You alarmed him. You delayed the flight, and you set in motion a chain of events that has led us here. All because of a feeling rooted in what, Ms. Bishop? What is the source of that feeling?" She had no answer. She just stood there, weeping silently. Desmond shifted his laser-like focus to Officer Miller. "Officer, you are not my employee. You work for the Port Authority, but you operate in my terminal on my airline's leased property. So for now you answer to me. On what grounds did you place my son in handcuffs?" Miller, unlike Karen, tried to bluster. He fell back on his training and protocol. "The gate agent reported a suspicious individual, sir. The subject was becoming agitated and causing a public disturbance. My priority is the safety of all passengers." "A public disturbance," Desmond said, his voice dangerously calm. "I have seen a half-dozen videos of this incident already, officer. My son was standing still. He was speaking clearly. He was asking questions, as is his right. The only person I saw creating a disturbance was you when you escalated a simple ticket query into a criminal detention. Did you ask him for his identification?" "He was being uncooperative," Miller insisted. "No, I wasn't," Wallace spoke up for the first time, his voice clear and strong. "I offered to show him my ID, my passport, my MIT acceptance letter. He refused to look at them. He just told me to empty my pockets." Desmond's eyes bored into Miller. "So you ignored exculpatory evidence. You ignored his attempts to comply and clarify. You went straight to the most extreme measure. Why is that your standard procedure, officer?" "To handcuff every passenger who asks you a question." The situation was tense. Miller mumbled his bravado, fading fast. "You made it tense," Desmond countered. "You had a choice. You could have de-escalated. You could have investigated. You could have spoken to him like a human being. But you chose to assert your authority over a child. You saw a nail and you decided to be a hammer. Just then, the door opened and a harried-looking man in a suit rushed in. 'Desmond! My God, I just got your message. I came as fast as I could.' It was Jonathan Weathers, the director of JFK's operations. "John," Desmond said, his tone not softening in the slightest. "Good of you to join us. I was just having a conversation with your Officer Miller about his training protocols. I'm curious to know if the Port Authority's official policy is to profile and handcuff teenagers without cause." Weathers looked at Miller with pure fury. "Frank, what the hell did you do?" He then turned to Desmond, his hands up in a placating gesture. "Desmond, whatever happened, we will make it right. The officer will be suspended pending a full investigation. We will issue a formal apology." "This is far beyond an apology." "John," Desmond interrupted. "This is a systemic failure. This officer felt empowered to act this way. This gate agent, my employee, felt justified in starting it. This isn't one or two bad apples. This is a rotten orchard." Desmond walked back over to his son. He placed a hand on Wallace's shoulder. "Here is what is going to happen," he announced to the room, his voice now ringing with the absolute authority of a man who could buy and sell entire companies before breakfast. "Ms. Bishop, as of this moment, your employment with Aerolink is terminated. You will be escorted from the premises. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you." "Officer Miller," he said, turning to Weathers, "I want him fired, not suspended, not on paid leave. Fired. And my legal team will be filing a formal complaint with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division regarding this incident. We will also be filing a civil suit against the Port Authority and against Officer Miller personally. We will subpoena his records, and I am willing to bet my entire fortune that my son is not the first person of color he has treated this way. Mr. Chen," he said, his gaze shifting to the terrified station manager, "you will be coordinating a mandatory system-wide retraining for every single customer-facing Aerolink employee at this airport starting tomorrow. It will be conducted by an outside consulting firm that specializes in racial bias and de-escalation. I will approve the firm myself. And John," he finished looking at the airport director, "you and I are going to have a very long conversation about the culture of your security staff. And then Aerolink's board is going to have a very long conversation about whether JFK remains a primary hub for our airline." The threat was clear and catastrophic. Pulling Aerolink out of JFK would cost the airport hundreds of millions of dollars and thousands of jobs. It was a nuclear option. The reckoning was complete. In the space of 10 minutes, Desmond Dunmore had ended careers, launched federal investigations, and threatened the economic stability of the entire airport. He had done it all without raising his voice. He had simply wielded his power with the terrifying precision of a surgeon. He turned to Wallace. "Come on, son, let's go home." The private jet to Boston could wait. Tonight they would go back to their own house, and tomorrow the war would begin. The consequences of that day in the Concord Lounge did not fade away. They metastasized. Desmond Dunmore was true to his word, and he pursued every promised action with the relentless, methodical focus he applied to a corporate acquisition. For Karen Bishop, the unraveling was swift and brutal. Her termination was the least of it. The video Wallace's friend had sent him was just the first. Within hours, a half-dozen more videos from different angles had surfaced online. One, filmed by a passenger standing directly behind Wallace, captured her words with crystal clarity. "This is a rather expensive ticket for someone your age." It became a meme. A hashtag was someone your age. The media firestorm was instantaneous. News outlets picked up the story, and the identities of everyone involved were quickly discovered. Karen Bishop's face was plastered across the internet, a poster child for what the world was now calling Gate Agent Karen. She was doxxed. Her address was posted on radical forums. She received threats. She tried to give an interview to a local news station, tearfully explaining that she was overworked and had just been trying to follow security protocols, but her defense sounded hollow and self-serving. A GoFundMe, started by her sister, to cover legal fees was shut down after being overwhelmed with negative reports. She became a pariah, unemployable in the airline industry or any customer service role. Her life, as she knew it, was over, dismantled not just by a powerful CEO but by the irrefutable evidence of her own prejudice broadcast to a world that had run out of patience for it. Officer Frank Miller's fate was more complex but no less devastating. The Port Authority initially tried to protect him, placing him on paid administrative leave and releasing a vague statement about an ongoing investigation. But Desmond Dunmore's legal team was a pack of wolves. They filed the civil rights lawsuit as promised, and the discovery process was a nightmare for the Port Authority. The lawyers subpoenaed Miller's entire service record. A pattern emerged. Over a 12-year career, Officer Miller had received 17 citizen complaints. 14 of them were from Black or Latino men. All had been dismissed with a minor reprimand or no action at all. Wallace's case was the one that finally broke the dam. With the backing of Aerolink's immense financial and legal resources, 3 of the previous complainants joined the lawsuit, turning it into a class action case. The pressure became unbearable. The mayor's office weighed in. Civil rights groups held protests outside Port Authority headquarters. Officer Miller was no longer a PR problem. He was a political liability. He was fired, stripped of his pension, and left to face the lawsuit as a private citizen. His blue wall of silence crumbled as former colleagues, fearing for their own jobs, refused to publicly support him. He had thought he was an untouchable arm of the law. He discovered he was just a disposable cog in a machine that would sacrifice him to save itself. But Desmond Dunmore wasn't just focused on punishment. His vision was grander. The incident had exposed a rot, not just at JFK, but within his own company, and he was determined to perform radical surgery. He held a press conference that was broadcast on every major news network. He stood before the cameras with Wallace by his side, not as a victim, but as a catalyst. Desmond didn't just apologize, he took ownership. The events that my son experienced were not an anomaly, he said, his voice resonating with conviction. They were the symptom of a disease of bias that is far too common in our society, and I must admit within my own corporation. An apology is not enough. Action is required. He announced the Aerolink Promise, a massive, multi-pronged initiative. First, he announced the immediate and mandatory implementation of a new top-to-bottom implicit bias and de-escalation training program for all 80,000 Aerolink employees worldwide. The program was developed in partnership with the NAACP and a leading civil rights advocacy group. Second, he announced the creation of the Wallace Dunmore Flight Path Initiative, a $50 million fund dedicated to providing scholarships, mentorships, and STEM education for underprivileged youth in communities across the country who dreamed of careers in aviation and engineering. My son had a dream and the resources to pursue it, Desmond declared. We must ensure that the next generation of pilots, engineers, and leaders is not determined by their zip code or the color of their skin. The move was a masterstroke of corporate jiu-jitsu. He had taken the worst PR crisis in his company's history and turned it into a platform for meaningful systemic change. It elevated him from a mere CEO to a genuine thought leader on corporate responsibility. Aerolink's stock, after an initial dip, soared to an all-time high as the public lauded the company's transparent and proactive response. The karma that hit Karen Bishop and Frank Miller was hard and personal. It was the direct consequence of their individual actions. But the broader karma, the one Desmond Dunmore orchestrated, was societal. It was the rebuilding that followed the destruction, the turning of a moment of ugly prejudice into a legacy of opportunity. He wasn't just getting revenge for his son. He was trying to build a world where no other child would have to endure what Wallace had. 6 months later, the winter snows had melted, and the first signs of spring were budding on the trees along the Charles River in Cambridge. Wallace Dunmore sat in his dorm room at MIT, a complex differential equation glowing on his laptop screen. He was no longer just a kid who loved planes. He was a student at the finest engineering school in the world, wrestling with the very mathematics that kept them in the sky. The incident at JFK felt like a lifetime ago, a scene from someone else's movie. But it was a part of him now. It had forged a new kind of strength in him, a resolve that went beyond academics. He walked with a different awareness, a deeper understanding of the invisible currents of bias that shaped the world. But it hadn't made him bitter. It had made him determined. His phone buzzed. It was his dad calling from his office in Chicago. "How are the Navier-Stokes equations treating you?" Desmond asked, his voice warm. "They're treating me like I owe them money." Wallace laughed. "But I'm getting there." "How was the meeting in Seattle?" "Productive. The new composite materials for the 797 wing assembly look promising," Desmond said, easily slipping into the language they both loved. They talked for a few minutes about engineering, about Wallace's classes, about the upcoming robotics competition. It was their normal. Then his father's tone shifted slightly. "I was in D.C. yesterday. Met the first class of the Flight Path scholarship recipients. 20 kids, Wallace. Smart, hungry, brilliant kids from all over the country. There was a girl from Detroit, wants to be a propulsion systems engineer. A boy from rural Mississippi who's been building his own drones since he was 12. They reminded me of you." Wallace was quiet for a moment, absorbing the weight of that. "That's amazing, Dad." They all wanted to hear the story. Desmond continued softly. "The story of what happened to you at JFK. It's become a kind of legend for them. Proof that you can fight back. Proof that something good can come from something ugly." "It doesn't always feel good," Wallace admitted, looking out his window. "Sometimes I still get angry when I think about it. The feeling of those handcuffs." "I know," Desmond said, "and you have a right to that anger. Don't ever let anyone take that away from you, but don't let it be the only thing you take from it either. Look at what you started, son. Your moment of pain has become their moment of opportunity. That's a legacy, not the one we would have chosen, but a powerful one nonetheless." Wallace understood. His father had taught him about lift, how a wing's shape creates a pressure differential that overcomes the force of gravity, allowing something impossibly heavy to soar. In a way, that's what they had done. They had taken the crushing weight of an ugly, unjust moment and used it to generate lift, not just for themselves, but for others. "I have to run to a study group," Wallace said after a while. "But I'll call you this weekend." "Work hard. I'm proud of you, Wallace." "More than you know," Desmond said. "I'm proud of you too, Dad," Wallace replied, and he meant it. He hung up the phone and looked back at his screen. It was just a series of numbers and symbols, but he knew that hidden within them were the principles of flight, of overcoming resistance, of soaring above the things that try to hold you down. He smiled a genuine, unburdened smile. The flight to Boston had been delayed, but he had finally arrived, and his view from 30,000 feet was clearer than ever. The story of Wallace Dunmore is a stark reminder that in our modern world, the lines between power prejudice and accountability are drawn in real time for all to see. It shows how a single quiet moment of injustice can erupt into a firestorm of consequence, forever altering the lives of everyone involved. It's a story of karma, not as a mystical force, but as the direct, tangible result of choices made in the light of day. But more than that, it's a story of transformation, how the worst of experiences can be forged into a catalyst for the greatest of changes, turning a personal wound into a public mission for a better, more just world. If this story of justice and accountability resonated with you, if you believe that a person's character, not their appearance, should be the measure of their worth, then please help us share this message. Hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with your friends and family to spread the word. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true life stories where the truth always comes to light and justice, in the end, is always served. Thank you for listening.